Jordan Mason might help you win your dynasty leagues this year, but what is he worth on the open market? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her over at Yahoo. And joining us today, as always, on Wednesdays is Matt Williamson. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including what is Michael Pittman's trade value? Who is the top tight end in Dynasty? But Matt, I want to start with this first question, and it's a really good one. It's from at Bill's Chat. He wants to know, what is the appropriate value for Jordan Mason from the 49ers in a dynasty trade? It seems like a unique situation. If you're not a contender and you have Mason, what is a fair asking price?
So I'm going to recycle some information from Brian Peacock, my co-host on the Peacock and Williamson podcast, shameless plug there, who also hosts Locked On Niners. And he believes big picture that the plan in San Francisco, especially now that Ayuk is signed, is trade Debo after the season, after hopefully winning the Super Bowl, and making McCaffrey, who they also recently invested in, the quote wide back, the Samuel. Some carries, a lot of alignment outside the backfield, outside the numbers slot, keep his career lengthier, less punishment. And therefore, Mason, maybe a year from now, with a healthy McCaffrey and Samuel out of the picture, truly being the lead back. He thinks that's the plan. Now, subject to change, McCaffrey's out, and who knows what's going to happen with Debo. But I think Mason is in the long-term plans. I mean, we've seen so many of these Niner running backs that show up for a game or two and then just vanish. And if you look at his history, he was pretty highly touted if it wasn't for Jahmyr Gibbs coming and kind of screwing him up at Georgia Tech. So I think that's noteworthy. I absolutely think he's a talented player that, of course, is benefiting from his situation, but would be an asset to any team. I think he's a good running back. So if I'm a contender and or a McCaffrey owner, I don't think a second is crazy.
And I wanted to mention really quickly on Dynasty League football right now, that is the most common trade for Jordan Mason. We've had at least a dozen Jordan Mason for a 2025 second round pick. Now we have had also several first round picks going with Jordan Mason, and a lot of times like a third or a fourth is attached with it. But Kate, what about you? What do you think Jordan Mason's trade value is right now?
I think a second round pick feels super, super reasonable here in this circumstance. I also want to point out something, and this might be just kind of like put on your tinfoil hats with me. Jordan Mason is a free agent in 2025. Is there a case that he's making himself an argument to be like a top running back in this free agent market? Because yes, I could very wholly picture a world where, Christian McCaffrey is the what was the phrase? Wide back, utilize him as a receiver. But that's also contingent on the fact that they need to get Jordan Mason under contract long term. And if he keeps playing the way he's playing, I'm going to say he might have earned a starting job elsewhere in the league where they might be willing to pay him a little bit more money.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So I just double checked. He's actually a restricted free agent in 2025, which means the 49ers would either have to put a first round tender, a second round tender, or an original round tender. I don't see it doing an original round because somebody would just be able to pick him off, right? But can the 49ers, who just gave Christian McCaffrey a big contract extension this offseason, who just paid Brandon Ayuk, who are going to have to pay Deebo Samuel, can they pay $4 to $5 million for 1 year of Jordan Mason? I don't know, Matt. I honestly don't know.
That's a great question. I didn't look into his contract status, but that puts a new wrinkle on things for sure, because just even the running back room, if we still call McCaffrey a running back, it's pretty expensive pretty quick. I mean, I would think the only option is a second round tender. A first round's too much. Original doesn't get you anything with him. And that's not so bad, though. Like, Marcus, you're a Cowboy guy. I mean, if he was on the open market after the season with really only 1 or half a year of wear and tear on his body at the NFL level, I think he's attractive.
Yeah, I think he'd be attracted to a lot of teams, because I think he's got power and he's got some explosiveness, and there just aren't many other running backs out there that have that. Kate, I wanted to ask you about a couple of receivers, because that was the original question. What receiver could you trade Jordan Mason for? And we actually have a few over the last couple of days. One trade here that happened on Monday was Jordan Mason for T. Higgins in a Dynasty league. How do you feel about that one?
I'm going to be honest, with the track record at this point with T. Higgins, him being in a contract year, not healthy, which has been a big issue, I might just prefer Jordan Mason. And I feel kind of crazy about that. But again, I kind of have my tinfoil hat on at this point, and I'm saying, like, yeah, if the price is Jordan Mason for, a second round pick, I'm just buying up all of the Jordan Mason that I possibly can. And, kind of hoping that one of these lead managers in my leagues, like, thinks they're offloading this very temporary asset that I think could be more long-term than even a T. Higgins, who I love the talent of, but availability is everything.
Matt, what do you think?
I don't think Higgins is going to be a Bengal next year. And I could see this year being a little uneven, or I don't want to get myself in harm's way before I get in a contract situation, and the vibes have been a little goofy in Cincinnati to start the season. I still think I want Higgins. I just think in 3 years, you'd much rather have Higgins than Mason, but that's not really the question,
No, I got another one. This one's even more fascinating. What about Jordan Mason for Rashee Rice? Both players are going to help you win this year. Not so sure about next year, Matt. So how do you feel about that one?
I understand the legal situation, but it's not close for me. I mean, if I only get 1 year out of both, I still want Rice. I mean, I think Rice is going to be maybe a top 10 receiver this year.
Kate, what do you think?
Rice pretty easily for me, because again, when we're looking at the suspension, we're projecting 3-4 games. Like,
no, this is where I differ. I think it's going to be a lot, to be honest with you.
Really?
I think we're going to be looking at double-digit games for Rashee Rice, and I think that's, you guys know how much I love Rashee Rice. That's my fear, is that Rice might not be available to you at any point in the fantasy season in 2025.
I don't project the situation like that. I would say at most I project 6 games. Maybe he gets that initial 10-game suspension, but I think he's going to appeal that. And I think the most we'd be looking at is probably 6 games. Again, I'm not an expert. This is just how I've kind of projected things here.
But I hope you're right, by the way. As a lifelong Rashee Rice fan, I hope you're right. If it's 6 games, even if it's 8 games, that's manageable. But once you start getting into the double-digit games, you're basically talking about an asset that's not going to help you for an entire season.
But I still think, again, kind of dynasty mindset, prioritizing wide receivers over running backs, prioritizing, a guy that I still think will help you win this year, probably going to be a top 10 wide receiver this season alone. There are a lot of reasons I think that you should favor the Rice situation, even with the suspension looming.
Matt, any final thoughts here before we move on?
Not especially. I mean, if you were I guess I'm going to throw this question to you guys. If you were a total rebuilder with very little chance of winning this year, are you dumping Mason right now?
Yes. Yeah. I want
even for a second, a generic second, or do you want to squeeze a little more?
I think I would rather have a player than a generic second. If I can get maybe a receiver that's a little bit lower than T. Higgins, because I think we all agree that T. Higgins is probably decent target to there. I think I would be moving
Jordan
him for
Addison.
another. Oh, I mean, you know how much I love Jordan.
That's a bad
all
name
day
for you
long.
guys because I don't like him and you guys do. But yeah,
I mean, so that would be a trade I would make.
What about like a Jackson Smith and Jigba?
Done.
Right? Like
done.
Yes.
done. Like I think that's kind of the range we're talking about. A Jordan Addison, a Jackson Smith and Jigba. What about like a Brian Thomas Jr.?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's kind of the range. If you want to swap players, I think those are great targets because I think they both, they can be immediate contributors, but these are guys that I really want to roster long term that I think probably have comparable value here on the trade market.
And that makes sense for both teams. If I picked up Mason for nothing and I can turn him into Brian Thomas Jr., I'm like, great. Okay,
Steal.
cool.
All right, let's talk about Michael Pittman's trade value because through 2 weeks, it's not been great in Indianapolis. We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by DoorDash. Football is finally back, which means it's time to order your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks on DoorDash without missing a play. I've been to hundreds of football parties over the last decade, and inevitably you're going to go to one of these parties that has a very unimpressive spread or just no food at all. But DoorDash is here to save the day. You can order your favorite pizza, wings, burgers, all from the comfort of your couch with DoorDash. Let them save football season this year. Use promo code LOCKFALL24 for 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer, terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's the only sportsbook that I use to make my game day bets. But we've got something a little bit different for you this week. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you're going to be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. And then on Friday, if you want more Matt Williamson, you got him. He's on that show as well. Go check it out. They do a fantastic job over there. All right, our next question, Matt, here is about Michael Pittman. How concerned are you about Michael Pittman after 2 games? Should you consider moving on? What's the play here?
Very concerned. And I'll be honest, I played this one very well in my dynasty leagues. I owned I acquired Pittman or had a lot of Pittman stock 1 year ago because I've always thought, just watching his tape, studying the player, fantasy aside, that he's a vastly underrated player, that he's a really, really good wide receiver. And so I went out and bought him a lot. And then this offseason, I dumped him in every one of my leagues because what we're seeing now is my concern is just a 50% passer. A highly inaccurate thrower of the football. I like Richardson a lot, but he misses so many layups. And Pittman's your layup guy. They ran a ton of RPOs, a lot of quick hitters last year. And Minshew connects on him and Richardson doesn't.
Okay, what's the play here?
Yeah, I'm moving on from Michael Pittman. It always feels wrong to quote unquote sell low on a player that you believe in the talent of. And Matt, I think you're totally on point here. The player just is not matching up with the fantasy production. I think Anthony Richardson's going to get a pretty long leash here. Long term, I still have my concerns about just his overall development as a passer, how this is going to go. But I mean, you have to consider the fact that this is Michael Pittman's production without Josh Downs in here, another capable layup guy. So like you have 2 layup guys. One of them's not even on the field yet, and we're still seeing some struggles. I also worry that like kind of these areas that we're seeing success from Anthony Richardson, these deep bombs down the field, that's not Michael Pittman's game, right? Like you're going to use these speedy guys, and Alec Pierce and AD Mitchell. Like those are the guys that kind of vibe with what Richardson is doing well at this point.
All right, Matt. So what's the play if you still have Michael Pittman on your roster? Because going into the month of September, he was being drafted as a top 20 dynasty receiver. The most recent trade for him is Darnell Mooney in a 2nd-round pick. Like, are you selling him that low?
I would nothing to do with Darnell Mooney, so that's basically a second for Pittman, which is still a little light for me. I mean, this probably Wednesday, September 18th, 2024 is probably not the day to sell him. You know, I mean, like if you put him on, everyone has the trade block feature. You know, if you put the trade block and it was just Pittman and everyone gets the email from Pittman, how many people will respond to you? Probably none. You know, like
Probably
if you get that in your inbox right now, you're not even going to probably write the owner back. So you might have to wait for a good game.
I want to run through some receivers that are currently being drafted behind him, and you tell me when to stop here. Okay, please do the same thing. I'm going to name you. These are all guys going into September that were being drafted behind Michael Pittman: Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, Deebo Samuel, Brian Thomas, T. Higgins, George Pickens. T. Higgins. You would rather have Pittman than T. Higgins.
Yeah. I'd rather have Pickens over Pittman though. Matt. So that might be where my tier break right around there.
Higgins is close. I prefer Higgins. Did you say Pickens after Higgins?
Yeah, but going in September.
They're not close to me.
Yeah, I agree. Pickens is wide receiver 28 right now.
Yeah, I would much rather Pickens.
Okay. I want to keep going because there's some other names here that I think are interesting. Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver 30. Yeah. Mike Evans, wide receiver 32.
Evans.
Christian Watson, wide receiver 35.
Nah, I'm not a Watson believer.
What about for you, Kate?
No, I do not like Christian Watson.
Okay. One more name that I wanted to throw out here. Ladd McConkey, wide receiver 36.
It's fair. I'd probably go with McConkey.
So this is where we're at with Michael Pittman. He's gone in 2 games from wide receiver 20 down to about wide receiver 35. And Matt, I think this goes to your point. Like,
real quick, I want to interject real quick. Like, I don't think you could get Higgins or McConkey or many of those names for second and Mooney though.
No, I agree.
You know what I mean?
I think you're right, though. This is why you don't trade Michael Pittman now. You wait for, and honestly, it's probably not going to just be one game. He's probably going to need to have like a 2 or 3 game stretch where he looks good, and that's where you sell, because I think we're going to get a lot of these stinker performances over the next couple of years. And once AD Mitchell, who's already getting some of these targets, becomes a more focal point in the offense, I just don't see the days of Michael Pittman getting 9, 10, 11 targets a game happening again.
I don't either.
Okay. Any final thoughts before we move on here?
Could he be a trade candidate if the bottom falls out?
I don't think so. Like they just paid him. I think they want him to be a stabilizer in this offense. And let's be honest, like if you're going to have a pathway for Anthony Richardson to develop into the quarterback you want him to, I think you need Michael Pittman there, right? Like I think Michael Pittman's a pretty big piece of the puzzle here in the overall trajectory of Richardson. So I think you got to probably ride it out if you're the Colts.
I think if they trade him, it's this offseason. It's not during the year. Like there's no point in trading him right now. Yeah, you need him to help develop Anthony Richardson. But if we get to the offseason and it's just clear that AD Mitchell is on his way to stardom and Josh Downs is your underneath receiver, I think that's when it probably makes sense. All right, Matt, let's talk about the tight end position, because I don't know if you've looked at the scoring at tight end across the NFL.
Oh,
it's horrendous. It's awful. Let's restack the dynasty tight ends moving forward next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I absolutely love Gametime. It's what I use to buy tickets whenever I want to go to sporting events, concerts, comedy events near me. I even used Gametime this week to buy tickets for Jacksonville Buffalo this week, week 3, Monday Night Football. It's so easy to buy tickets on Gametime. They even have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier than ever before. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. They have so many great features, including the panoramic view of your seat, so you know exactly what your seats are going to look like before you buy and what your view is going to look like. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every day. Everydayers, on Thursday's show, we're going to look at some new batches of ADP. We're going to look at some guys that you should be targeting in trades going into week 3. So make sure you tune in for that. But let's finish up here with the tight end position, because it's been a minefield through 2 weeks. Matt, I want you to talk about your top 5 tight ends right now after watching this game. First of all, who is your tight end 1 in Dynasty right now?
So a lot of this conversation is going to be centered around just how high are we going to put Brock Bowers, obviously. And one thing I wanted to mention with Bowers is he was so tremendous after the catch at Georgia. He has not very little yardage after the catch thus far in the NFL. So I think that's still coming. I'm not saying he can't gain yardage after the catch. So I still think that is on the horizon. I have a top 4 that I feel strongly about. I don't know who to put 5. And it goes Laporta, McBride, Bowers, Kincaid.
I agree with you. As I agree with you with the names, not the order. Kate, I want your top 4. How do you have these guys stacked?
All right. I'm going to shake it up just a little bit. Sam Laporta. I'm going to go Brock Bowers. I'm going to go Kincaid, which doesn't feel great for me right now, and then Trey McBride.
I'm going to go Bowers, Laporta, Kincaid, McBride. But depending on the week, you could move those guys all around. But I think the big point here is that you want one of those 4 tight ends. And then I think it's a pretty significant drop off after those 4. We talked about Mark Andrews on last week's podcast. He's still splitting reps with Isaiah Likely. I think Kyle Pitts looked really good against the Eagles. He was blocking incredibly well. He's just not getting the targets that we were hoping for, right? And you don't get points for how well you block. And then Travis Kelce, Matt, I don't know what to say about Travis Kelce, but he kind of looks old to me. What do you think?
Yeah, very much so. And I said this all off season. I have great respect for him, but I just don't think spending the off season on the Eras tour is wonderful for fantasy football production. I mean, at his age, I mean, how much working out do you think he did? I mean, he's on every commercial.
I also don't think there's any rush for the Chiefs to like overuse him in September. Like what's the point?
True.
Right. I think they found this out last year. Like there's no reason to give him a bunch of targets and put a bunch of hits on his body in September when the goal is to win a Super Bowl. And that's when we get to January, that's when they're going to, I don't want to say,
but that doesn't help us.
No, it doesn't help us. And I think that's why last month, Matt, we saw Travis Kelce being drafted as tight end 3 in Dynasty leagues. He's down to tight end 7 right now. And man, you can make an argument that he should be even lower than that.
I think he's holding on by a string to be 7 or 8. You know, I mean, I might rather have Kittle. A name you didn't bring up that I think is really enticing but dangerous is Hawkinson. I mean, Hawkinson's a really good player.
Hawkinson's not dangerous to me at all. Like Hawkinson should absolutely be in the top 5 conversation for me. I know he's coming back from an ACL. It was late in the season. So like the fact that he's not immediately available to you definitely bumps him down slightly. But like, you're telling me when he's fully healthy in a Kevin O'Connell offense that we're not going to be ranking him as a weekly top 4 tight end option. He's 26 years old. Like, that man has miles and miles to go. But yeah, Travis Kelce, we've been saying it all off season. This is, one of those things that, like, yes, he's going to be on the field. He says he has a couple of years left, which but I don't think that necessarily translates to he's got a couple of years left as an elite fantasy tight end, because the Kansas City Chiefs are a smart organization who are going to want to protect one of their most valuable players for the moments that it actually matters.
Hawk or Andrews?
Hawk. Yeah. And that's where I think you can get such a discount on TJ Hawkinson right now, tight end 9. And Matt, the way that I feel about this is like every week that goes by, I just want to move Hawk up one spot every time because he's getting closer.
1 week closer. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the other thing that's actually helped Hawk the last 2 weeks is Sam Darnold looks competent. And I know it's probably mostly Kevin O'Connell, but like,
Kevin O'Connell's not going anywhere.
I think it's just an offense, right? It's just an offense that I think is going to be good kind of regardless of who is at quarterback. And that just makes Hawkinson a very stable option.
100% agree. I think the more we talk through it, he's clearly my 5. And after we see him for a week or two, he might go ahead of Kincaid or whomever.
The last question I had for you is, what are you doing with Kyle Pitts? Because we talked about this on Tuesday's show. I thought Pitts looked really good against Philly when he was given the opportunities. I have some concerns about this offense with Zach Robinson. I have a lot of concerns about Kirk Cousins still. But what are you doing with Kyle Pitts?
I think he's a hold. And I know that's kind of a cop-out, but I have a little bit of worry. Like, what would Sean McVay do with Pitts? Would he make him Cup or would he make him a Higbee? The answer is neither. So I think, they inherited Pitts. I don't know that this Falcons staff would have drafted him with the 8th overall pick because I'm not sure what to do with them schematically with the way the Rams play offense in exclusively 11 personnel.
Do you think he could be a trade target?
Maybe. Of course, I previewed the Falcons like crazy for week 1 against the Steelers. And if they're going to live in 11, who do you use to help block TJ Watts of the world? Pitts would run by him and kind of throw an elbow at him and be the chipper, but didn't slow him down at all. Like, you can't, that's not how you use Pitts. I mean, he needs to be out in routes. And who helps your 5 man? Who's your 6 man in protection with the Falcons? There isn't one. You don't want Bijan. You don't want Pitts. It's a problem.
I got a hypothetical NFL trade for you that I want to throw at you before we leave. Who says no to a trade of Kyle Pitts to the Chargers for a 2nd round pick?
Neither.
Probably the Falcons.
Yeah. I mean, the Chargers obviously want to live in 12 personnel, but they have other tight ends on their roster that can block, and their offensive line's good and the running backs can block. What they need is somebody that can get vertical in their offense. And that's what Greg Roman's offenses have had before. It's why Mark Andrews was so good in that offense. I think like Kyle Pitts on a team like the Chargers could thrive.
Would Harbaugh want him?
I mean, he got to be better.
I think Roman would.
They just need somebody that can scare defenses in the middle of the field. They don't have that.
No, not at all.
Kate, any final thoughts before we head out?
I just don't think we're getting that trade done. I just think
try to will it to existence.
I think it's a fair note. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like the Chargers were kind of hoping to be in the market on a Brock Bowers and they didn't get that. Like, I think this is probably like the next closest thing they could get. But if I'm the Falcons, what is my incentive to do that for a 2nd round pick? Because we've already used a 1st round pick on a quarterback of the future in that situation. Now that we're starting to see Kirk Cousins, like your
option will be interesting.
That'll be the key, right?
Yeah.
Should be fascinating. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube and download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. You can follow Kate at Kate Majuk. You can also check her out over at Yahoo. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.